diapers on a plane. Are you ready to learn all about flying standby?
Flying standby means never knowing if you're going to get where you're going.
Flying standby means flying for a great price.
Flying standby means I get paid back. Flying standby means more vacations. Flying standby means getting stuck in the airport with Mom.
So what is flying standby? So you're supposed to be like the interviewer.
Okay. Are you ready to learn about flying standby on a buddy pass? So what is flying standby? So today on episode number 2 of Diapers on a Plane, we have a special guest here, my wife, Catherine, who happens to work in the airline industry and is somewhat of an expert on flying standby. So, what?
You could say that.
So, Catherine, what is flying standby?
So flying standby is when you fly on an airplane in a seat that was not sold to a customer. So that could mean they either didn't show up for their flight, they bought a ticket and they didn't show up, or the airline wasn't able to sell all the seats on a certain aircraft. So it basically means you fly unconfirmed when somebody else doesn't show up.
Okay, so how does that work exactly? How do you acquire one of these seats?
So you have to know somebody that works for an airline. You can find buddy passes online. You can find them on Craigslist or your local classifieds. You might even find somebody promoting them on Instagram. I would implore you and warn you not to ever accept a buddy pass this way, as it could cost you flying privileges. And when I say flying privileges, I mean you could be banned. You could be put on a do not fly list depending on the employee or depending on your behavior. So to get a buddy pass, you want to know somebody and trust somebody that works for an airline, and then arrange travel through that airline employee.
Okay, so you have to know somebody who works in the airline industry. Great. So as a standby flyer, where can you go?
So each airline is individual. So you can't ask for a buddy pass ticket for, say, Southwest and then go fly somewhere that JetBlue flies. If you get a buddy pass on Southwest, then you're going to be flying on Southwest routes only. You can go to any airline's website and look up their route map, and that will tell you all the destinations they fly and the way that you can get there. So for instance, you may not be able to fly Utah to Denver on every single airline. So you can fly anywhere that particular airline flies.
Great. So I get a ticket from an airline friend. I go to the airport. What if I change my mind and decide to fly somewhere else?
You can totally do that, but you don't get to show up at the airport and then create a whole bunch of extra work for the airline employees, the airport ticket counter employees. They are there to serve the customers. And while technically you are going to be one of those customers, you are there flying for a very discounted rate. And so you need to do all of your arrangements through your travel agent, which is going to be that airline employee that gave you the buddy pass. So you can make any changes, you can make any route changes, you can change your destination, but you do need to work that out through the airline employee, because the ticket that you got is just like the ticket that you bought online. It only goes from point A to point B. It's not an open-ended ticket, and it doesn't take you wherever you decide on a whim that you want to go.
So we mentioned that if people who know airline employees can fly standby, but who else can fly standby?
So I can fly standby as the airline employee. Gabriel can fly standby as my companion, my travel companion, or my spouse. And then all of these little guys can fly standby because they're my kids. And then my parents can fly standby. Not his parents, but my parents. So if his parents want to fly, they have to use one of those buddy passes. So airline employees get special privileges. It's like perks of the job. So I get to fly, my family gets to fly, but anybody else that I want to fly, so friends or extended family or cousins, they all get to use a buddy pass.
Okay, so this has come up a lot when, so as an airline employee, how many buddy passes do you have to distribute?
So again, I don't fly on a buddy pass. It's just the perks of my job. Buddy passes are the ones I give away to other people, and I get, I believe, 4 round trip a quarter, so 4 times a year, but every airline is different. And depending on how long you've been with an airline, you may earn additional buddy passes. So really, it's up to the airline employee. If they may not have enough, if you ask them if you want to fly somewhere, but one ticket, one of those buddy pass tickets is going to get you your whole entire itinerary so long as you don't change it. So even if you want to fly halfway around the world, then you can do that on one buddy pass. You can't make a stop at each city and hang around for a week, but if you're flying from point A to point B to point C to point D and it's all in one ticket, you can plan stopovers just like you can on a real ticket for 12 hours or so. But again, that itinerary has to be in a bundle.
Right. So I think that's something that comes up a lot is we offer friends buddy passes, but they think they're taking those away from us. And so they say, no, we don't want to take your buddy passes from you. So let's ask you another question. And this may seem obvious, but why would somebody want to fly standby?
It's a great price. You could go online and you could find a ticket for a destination and you can pay for that ticket out of pocket. But if you fly on a buddy pass, you're going to be basically could be flying at like 1/10. It's a pretty significant fraction. Now, there are risks involved with that because when you buy a ticket, you get to show up at the airport and you get to go sit down and you get to go to that destination. When you get a buddy pass, you buy a ticket for a fraction of the price and it's not confirmed. So when you show up at the airport, you have to go sit at the gate and you wait for your name to be called. There's no guarantee that you're going to be able to go where you want to go. But if that's okay with you, if you're just looking for a weekend fun getaway, if you are looking to just get out of the cold and spend a day at the beach, or if you just want to surprise somebody that you are great friends with and you want to fly to, say, Atlanta and go see a good friend, then you can do that as long as you don't have somewhere to be. If you need to go to a funeral, if you need to go to a wedding, a baby shower, a bridal shower, a birth, any one of those very significant events, then you do not want to fly on a buddy pass because there is no guarantee that you're going to get there.
Yeah, so I was going to ask when not to fly, but I think you just covered that. But yeah, some of the pointers like with that, when you have somewhere to be, like say there's a cruise, right? And you know that the cruise is going to leave with or without you on a certain date. You definitely don't want to use a buddy pass on that same day. For us, when we go on cruises, we try to get to that destination a few days early and just stay at a hotel there because it's still a lot cheaper than flying, but we don't run through the stress of like a storm hitting or the flight selling out and us not being able to make it there. So if you have somewhere that you absolutely have to be, standby tickets might not be the best way.
So you could technically still use a buddy pass. This is always the advice I give everybody. Either give yourself enough cushion that you can get there in advance. That means you have to take extra time off or whatever because you're going to be there early. Or make sure that if that buddy pass doesn't get you there, that you have enough money and that you're willing to pay for a last minute ticket out of pocket, because those are your two alternatives.
Yeah, I think this episode is what is flying on a buddy pass, but it would be fun to do maybe a future episode on how we fly on buddy passes because
how we fly on standby, because again, we don't use buddy passes.
I stand corrected. Yes, how we fly standby because we definitely have our methods that have worked for us and sometimes not, but generally 95% of the time we get where we want to go.
It may take 24 hours, but to make a 2-hour flight, but
yeah. But talking about buddy passes, when are good times to use a buddy pass?
So it's probably easier to tell you when you shouldn't use a buddy pass. You don't want to use a buddy pass during a school break. You don't want to use a buddy pass on a weekend. Scratch that. You can use a buddy pass on a weekend. President's weekend, Super Bowl weekend. Weekends are going to be harder, and especially if a holiday's involved, especially if that holiday falls on a Monday, because that's a long weekend that people can take extra time off of work. Spring break, fall break, anytime the grade schools are out, those are going to be harder times to find open seats. It's also going to be harder times that employees aren't going to be filling up those seats. So one thing that we should probably talk about is your standby priority as a buddy passer. But back to when you should fly. Saturdays, it doesn't give you the entire weekend, but if you could leave on a Thursday and come back on a Saturday, that's excellent, because all the other people flying, they want to come back on Sunday. They want to really utilize that weekend. If you can fly back in the middle of spring break, I still do never advise traveling during a school break, but if you can come back before that break's over, you can kind of hedge off a lot of the people. You also want to be cognizant of where you're flying. So one place that we always fly to is San Francisco during GDC, which is the Game Developers Conference. And it's really hard to get in and out of San Francisco because there are so many people. Same for Orlando. Like there are conferences there all day long because all year long because it's such great weather there all the time. And so you need to be aware of what's happening in the city, South by Southwest in Austin, Texas. Those types of things are going to be really hard to get to regardless of if it's a holiday, because that's a major event happening in that city.
Yeah, we did make that mistake of flying to Austin one year, not realizing South by Southwest was going on, and needless to say, we had to get pretty creative to get home. But we did. There's always a way. So back to that. There's a few things I think we could touch on. Say I got a buddy pass from an airline employee, and run me through what happens when I get to the airport. So I have my ticket. What are the next steps? So
you basically are going to use a buddy pass the exact same way as you are a ticket up until the boarding process. So you get your ticket. Again, you're going to go through the employee that gave you the buddy pass. You're going to check in 24 hours before your flight's about to depart. You are not going to be able to make a seat selection. So that's going to be one major difference. You're still going to add any extra assistive devices that you need. So if you're bringing a baby, then you would mark that you're traveling with an infant. Depending on where you're traveling, you may have to pay taxes for that infant. So if it's outside the US or outside the country that you're living in, you will have to pay additional taxes. So be aware of that, even though you're not paying for a seat for that infant. You would still mark that you're bringing a stroller, bringing a car seat, bringing any baggage. All of that still applies. So you check in 24 hours before your flight. You want to make sure that you are there early enough to get through security, because if you don't make it to the gate in time for the flight, you're not a paying customer. You can't run up at the last minute ready to board. Once they call your name, if you are not there to claim your seat, then they will move on to the next person. So make sure you get to the airport in enough time to get through security and that you are comfortably seated at the gate prior to the boarding process. Every airline and every airport is going to do it just a little bit different. And so they might call your name at the last minute, or they might call it in advance depending on how many seats open there are. So just make sure you get there in enough time. When you get to the gate, just find a seat that's close enough to the gate where you can hear all the announcements. If it's loud and rowdy, then again, make sure that you're close enough and that you can hear. This isn't the time to put in your earbuds and listen to some music. This is the time to listen to the announcements. Don't crowd the gate. Don't ask a bunch of questions. Again, you're not there to make more work for them. You're there flying at a fraction of the cost, and so you want to be calm, polite, and sincere. And then just wait for your name to be called. In certain airports, they may not call your name if you don't get a seat. So once the flight has closed, then you can approach the counter and say, hey, I was here. You didn't call my name, so I obviously didn't get a seat, but I want to try for the next flight. And so just wait, sit tight until they call your name, wait for the doors to close, and then you can chat with an airline employee about what your next options are. So
what are your next options?
So your next options are that you, again, as I mentioned earlier, you can only fly between point A and point B that you originally selected. If you don't get on the flight, we'll just use, as an example, we'll say Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. If you don't get on that flight, there's multiple flights a day, like say on Alaska Airlines, and there's going to be like 3 flights in the morning, 3 flights in the afternoon, a flight at night. If you don't get on that morning flight, you just approach the ticket counter, or they may ask you, like I said, if you want to then try for the next flight, and you say yes, and they roll you over, and then you can go eat airport food or go on a jog around the airport or check out the duty-free store. There aren't going to be duty-free stores in Portland. But you just sit tight and wait for that next flight, and then you're going to begin the process all over. Make sure that you are at the gate in enough time to hear the announcements and wait for your name to be called. And then once they do call your name, they're going to give you a seat assignment, and you're going to board the plane. You're going to stow your luggage. You're going to put your carry-on in your seat underneath the seat in front of you, and you're just going to sit tight, and you can order beverages, and you can get snacks, and you just want to make sure that you are in control of your person at all times.
Okay, so So say we're going through that scenario and I choose not to roll over. How do I go about, do I just lose that money or what happens?
So you want to go back again to everything that you do on a buddy pass is always going to go through that original airline employee that gave you the buddy pass. Just call them up and say, I didn't get on the flight, don't want to roll over, and I want to cancel my ticket. Airline employee is going to take care of all of that for you, and you should expect a refund back to your original form of payments within about a week or so. Generally, it's a lot easier, but every airline is a little bit different. And then also just keep in mind that some airlines do charge a small fee, upwards of no more than $5. So you may lose out $5 on the opportunity to try, but it's a pretty negligent number.
Great. So I think we covered the basics of flying on standby, but are there any points that you can think of that we might have missed, or any do's and don'ts that you want to re-emphasize?
So it's always a good idea to make sure that you are behaving well and that you are dressed appropriately. So you want to make sure that you're clean and covered. That's always a general rule. Each airline will have specific guidelines about what they expect you to wear, but generally leggings aren't allowed, workout clothes, pajamas, sweatpants. You want to dress nice. You don't have to be dressed in business casual, but a nice pair of jeans, a nice pair of shoes, not flip-flops, but sandals are okay. You want to cover up any maybe tattoos that you have that may not be a heart or a butterfly, that may be a little bit more abrasive, anything like that, just because you are going to be representing the company that gave you a buddy pass, and you want to make sure that you are doing that in a way that that company would want you to do.
Well, why? What happens if you don't?
So that brings up a really good point. If you aren't dressed appropriately, you could be denied boarding. And if you're denied boarding, you want to make sure that you understand that that's a real possibility. And you never want to talk about flying for free in public at the airport, because to put yourself in that situation, are you the person who paid, say, $1,000 for your ticket and you hear somebody in the seat next to you is flying for free or for a much discounted rate? It's not going to make you very happy about the situation, regardless of the risk that you're taking by flying on a buddy pass and not getting there. But there have been a lot of instances where buddy passers have come to the airport and they weren't fully aware of all the risks of flying on a buddy pass, and they made a big scene. I deal with that a lot in my job. I see a lot of it on social media, and we then have to report those people flying as a buddy pass and then consequently report the employee who gave them the buddy pass for not explaining fully the situation of what it means to fly on a buddy pass. So you want to make sure you're clean and covered, dressed well, understand you may not make that flight. And even if you roll over, you may not make that flight for days. It depends on the routes you're flying, how often the flights are. You may be flying on a flight that's only once a day. And if you don't get on that flight, then you're waiting a whole another day. You need to be prepared that you may need to pay for a hotel or eventually end up buying a plane ticket, a bus ticket, or figuring out another way home. So all of those things, you just need to be, the basic tenet here is that you may not get on the flight and you need to be prepared for all scenarios.
Yeah, I would say never travel somewhere that you can't afford to pay your way back.
Right.
It sucks, but that's just when you gamble, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
And think of it this way. If you were given a gift from somebody, would you want to bite that gift horse in the mouth? That's basically the way buddy passes work. The employee is putting their job, they're trusting you with their job, and it is a gift to be able to fly at a discounted rate. So you want to appreciate that and be on your best behavior.
Yep.
And then that does remind me, I think the one thing that we didn't cover is, where do you fall on the list of priorities? When are they going to call your name if you're a buddy passer? It's going to be a while for you to hear your name being called, because it works on a priority list. And the first people that get priority when you fly standby are the employees. And that's because I work for the benefits. After that, if Gabriel was flying or my kids were flying without me, if they're flying with me, then they're going to fly at my priority. But if they're not flying with me, then they're going to be called next, or my parents. After that, then come the buddy passers. So you're going to have to wait through all of the employee names that are trying to fly on that flight, and then you'll hear your name. So that's another good answer about, be aware of where you're flying to and from. Like, for instance, Atlanta is Delta's hub. That means a lot of employees are going to be in Atlanta trying to fly. So you're going to be very far down that list. If you're going to fly from another city on Delta, like say Chicago, where there aren't as many employees, then you'll have a much easier time of getting on because you're not fighting all those employees and your name is going to be higher on the list.
Right. So a lot of pros and cons to flying standby. I think a lot of people would never risk that. There's a certain amount of stress. Even in Catherine's work, she has coworkers that refuse to fly standby because it's stressful of whether you're going to get on the flight or not. But then other people like ourselves,
we love it. We thrive.
We're always looking at it becomes a little bit of a game and a challenge to see how inexpensively we can get somewhere, and you have that little internal reward for knowing that we were able to do something that we couldn't have done otherwise. So.
Well, and like Gabriel mentioned earlier, there is a certain finesse to flying standby versus flying on a buddy pass. But one thing it's important to keep in mind when you are flying on a buddy pass is that the employees that are ahead of you, they have a lot more options. So they have a lot more agreements with other airlines. So if they don't make the flight, they could possibly go hop on a different airline, whereas you are relegated to only use the airline and the flight route that you originally chose to get there. Unless you want to call back up that airline employee. Again, that airline employee needs to be available to make the changes on your flight and then figure out a different route. So if you do figure out a different route or you do end up rolling over, you could still see that standby list jump and your name drop to the bottom because other airline employees are crisscrossing the web and trying to figure out their best way home. So I think the case in point to take away here is there is no reward without the risk when you're flying with a buddy pass. It is a gamble. It is a huge risk, and there's a lot of variables that can make that risk change as you're going through your flight, but the reward pays out handsomely if you can make it work.
Awesome. I think we've probably covered about as much as we can on this episode. This is our second episode ever, so we're pretty excited. We're glad that you tuned in or watched on YouTube. Make sure to click subscribe, follow us, and next week we're going to be talking about Cancun, Mexico on our third episode. We are hoping to release episodes every Tuesday. That's the plan, and we're planning on sticking to that. So
check back then. And don't forget to subscribe and like our channels. You can find us on every social media channel that you can think of, except for Snapchat.
No snappy chatting. Yes, and that reminds me as well, because we're new to this and we forget things. If you have any questions, especially about flying standby, anything you think we missed, definitely hit us up on the email. Contact us at Diapers on a Plane, as well as we have a really good blog article we've written on this topic called How to Fly Standby.
It's actually called So You Think You Want to Use a Buddy Pass.
Correct. And it's on diapersonaplane.com.
So you can use the search engine and suss that out. And if you do have any questions, I'm always happy to answer them. So please don't hesitate to shoot us an email, leave a comment in the comment field, and we'll definitely be watching for that, and we'll respond.
Peace out. Are you ready to learn about flying standby on a buddy pass?